Click the links. You join the channel here or over on subscribe. So thanks to everyone who has. So a lot of this kind of stuff kind of reminds me of people wearing the Che Guevara shirts or any of those, the Moses Mordecai Levy shirts. Karl Marx, and you go like, what do you know about Karl Marx? I read the highlights of the Communist Manifesto. I read Engels. It's like they read all this left wing stuff. You go, have you read anything on the opposite side? Why would I want to do that? I don't know. If you don't know your opponent's argument, you don't know your own. Nazi says what? Anyway, kind of reminds me of all that, where like the evolving window of the left just keeps moving left. Where even the people on the left from 100 years ago, to their credit, I guess, would have been interpreted more as national leftists, not globalists, which is kind of a different thing. Anyway, so Stan Lee is increasingly problematic as the Bolshevik window continues to move left. The left-wing heroes of the past always get left behind as the next generations keep moving to the left. Stan Lee was a moderate left-winger for his day and age, but he also knew the horrors of Bolshevism in China, Russia, and that wasn't real communism. We'll do it better next time. Yeah, but I'm sure the Japanese, Italians, and Germans would tell you the same thing. So a left winger of a few decades ago is a Hugo Boss of today, including Jewish Stan Lee, because the Bolshevik window moves to the left until there's a war and things reset a bit. People like Lee had a different view of a successful society. I'm gathering this from what I've read about him and from his having read his comics for 40 odd years. Then this current generation of Bolshevik kids. Lee's generation wanted things that were attainable and society could adapt to. The modern left wing wants things that actively destroy society. What's a conservative? Someone asks why a fence is up before you tear it down. Hugo Boss said what? It's like, I really think you guys are doing this purity spiral that's probably going to result in mass starvation. Maybe before you continue further along this path, crack a history book. So the ideology of the brotherhood of man, but it was still a meritorious society between the pages of their comic books. And to be honest, even in their belief system, I think were the seeds for its own destruction, as someone has pointed out to me. A nation has to be a nation. I get the ideas kind of come from the comment section and from the Telegram. Not a commercial zone controlled by NGOs, which is where we are now. Even back then, comics pushed things that would destroy a nation. They warned against the right, but not as vigorously against the left, because they were the left. So in the best light, you can say comics had an idealized view of the world, but at its core, it still had the seeds of its own destruction, globalism. I mean, if you want to, for this channel, I view and grind the axe through the lens of the binary of globalism versus tribalism. But just because it seems like it's one or the other, and if you as soon as you move away from tribalism, you move towards a society being controlled, just a commercial zone controlled by big tech and bankers and those kind of things, right, and the media. Now, did they know it at the time, or is it all left wingism? Is all left wingism kind of fundamentally flawed? Comics were always woke, yes, but they were always idealized nonsense. Even in the 60s, they were hiding some things and pushing a false narrative regarding other things. But in comparison, they were much more balanced. At least there used to be an attempt at different views. In the past 20 years, that has all disappeared. Believe it or not, decades ago, they used to portray non-blonde characters as thugs and savage criminals. Now, modern comics are unrecognizable compared to something written circa 1972. But America was such a different and better place than the current nightmare of modern Sodom America. I will say that I believe the goal with older comics wasn't to endlessly foment discord and fuel the fires of racial grievances. They didn't want to actually destroy the country like modern comics, which do focus on how much they hate blonde-haired, light-eyed people. Modern comics is straight Saul Alinsky Frankfurt School. They don't want to make a better society or even split off into segregated areas, which would be awesome to get them out of our hair. They just want to destroy the West and other things. And they will use comics, video games, and movies to push it. In fact, as I was doing that Comicsgate article, I read some of the interviews with, I don't know if it's some of the people in the SJW segment of comics were just openly saying, like, yeah, it's okay the sales don't matter. Comics need to be used as propaganda. and propaganda for their side. So what about both sides of the equation? Can we, you guys are this left wing side. Can we have right wing nationalist viewpoints also represented? And they look at you like you have two heads. But I mean, the truth of the matter is, like, you and I, people like us, well balanced moderates, are not. Yes, believe it or not, I'm a moderate, but perhaps unrecognizable because it was from a few years ago. We're just never allowed in those rooms. Like, we're just not writing those articles. We're not working for Marvel or DC. You see what happens with people who are vaguely moderates, who would have been left wingers a few years ago. The names in Comicsgate. There's like the dozen fairly big names in Comicsgate who are now no longer allowed in the industry because they're of European origin, or they have the wrong viewpoints, or they're a little too Christian, and they're persona non grata. So their views are no longer represented in comics, to comics' detriment. You see the stuff that's coming out of mainstream comics. Comics, how would you have turned comics around? Like, if you wanted to try to do it, 5 or 10 years ago, you would have hired the names in Comicsgate, and instead of them going off on their own and selling comics privately, they would have taken over Marvel and DC. But it's like, we know that it was never in the cards. That's just not going to happen. Anyway, so who ran comics at their peak? A bunch of left wing guys, but there were still people who believed, I think, in improving the current system, where modern comics is overrepresented by women and pox who are openly communists. They want to tear the system, and openly racist too. They want to tear the system down and replace it with globalism. Modern comics are run by low IQ people who don't read a lot of history. They're kind of the under 50 participation trophy generation who have immediate emotional responses when they encounter diversity of thought. I mean, you saw what happened with Mark Waid, and he lost his mind when his views were challenged. And so did, like, why did diversity and Richard Meyer sitting in his Kia, why did he make them so crazy? He's a guy sitting in his car with a cell phone, with a comic in his lap, laughing at their he had a minusculely tiny channel, was like under 50,000, before it caught fire, talking about comics. Like, all they had to do was ignore him, and they just couldn't do it because he's challenging their worldview. So how do I say this part about the people in comics? They're sort of deliberately self-made misfits who don't want to fit in the present societal matrix. You can't have that view represented in stories because that dystopian globalist nihilism only appeals to others in that small group. It's sort of the sunk cost fallacy of a bad investment. Perhaps if you've been paying attention, don't say anything in the comments over the past 3 years, you've seen people who wanted you to participate in that sunk cost bad investment thing. They wanted you to join them in perhaps decisions that they now regret. I'm glad. I think I didn't join them, obviously, and I think most of us didn't join them in those decisions, unless you're in a position where you had to. So their system only works if ever, like Scott Adams, the guy who writes Dilbert, he's having a hard time on social media now because he's having a change of heart regards to some things, no pun intended. So their system only works if everyone is on board. That's why homeschooling, private identity groups, militias, spiritual centers that exclude them terrify them. You like how I just snuck in militias? They need centralized points of authority so that they can subvert and be the hidden man behind the curtain. It's the schism, misspelled, in the worldview between globalism and nationalism, where tribalism draws a circle around a self-identified group and says, this is us, for us, by us. You are not us. We're a discrete group. We have different values. You have interests adverse to ours. Your worldview of globalism is not ours, and we think it's harmful to us. When you say this to the current SJWs, they immediately get outraged. They know that they have to be allowed access into groups and systems so they can corrupt it. It's why you have to form groups and gatekeep out the undesirable SJWs. When you look at Comicsgate or Vox Days doing his own comic stuff, good writer, by the way, surprisingly good writer, because he does videos. I don't know if he's still out on YouTube. And then you read his writing, it's like his writing is totally different. So there's these tiny groups who are doing things on the outskirts, because even Vox Day and Comicsgate and whoever else, maybe there's other like independent comics out there, they are a tiny fraction, like just could have been ignored by the mainstream, and they just would have continued on, like they were never gonna be made into movies and be part of the mainstream pop culture. They were always going to be on the outskirts, and in fact, bringing them attention, it's like just brought them positive attention. While the giant mainstream machine is pushing Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse, and the rest, though, what's that other comic? One of them's I just declared bankruptcy, and I think Image and Dark Horse are probably next. But the stuff in the mainstream has no energy behind it whatsoever. It's just there, and they have years of IP development and name recognition and huge billion-dollar movie tie-ins to their name. And then you look at the paper version of these comics, and like, how come these comics aren't as cool as Iron Man 2008, the first Iron Man? That could have been your big resurgence of comics across the board. It's like, just try to tell the story that they told in the movie. Try to go back to telling something like that instead of just your bullshit nonsense. It's like, no, we're not going to do that. We'd rather be rule over an empire of dust, as the also tiresome guy says. And they're outraged at Fox Day and Comicsgate because anyone who challenges their narrative is giving people an option. People can look at Blonde Man Bad mainstream comics, or they can look at the alternatives, Blonde Man Rad, and simply call the SJWs pussies and take the alternatives. That's why SJWs have to censor and deplatform. They have bad ideas that don't withstand debate and scrutiny, which is funny because the left wing used to pride themselves on being free thinking, and now they're completely brainwashed and parodying ideas from government school. A lifetime of government schools and globalist media propaganda. You think that had any effect on you? And when I say that, it goes, well, how come you guys aren't brainwashed? Because we're not saying the thing that is in lockstep with your lifetime of government schools and globalist media propaganda. We're saying something different, and we're over target and catching anti-aircraft fire. We get debanked and censored and kicked off platforms. We're the ones who are raging against the machine. Yeah, we're saying things that are not in accord with the mainstream view. The left wing is saying things that are in accord with the mainstream view. We're the ones rebelling against the machine, and we suffer the slings and arrows for rebelling against the machine. The left, oh my God, the changing of the left is so disappointing to see, that like how they just, and I think is there's got to be some people on the left who are a little bit older who are looking around at this new left and like, this is not what we signed up for, but they're also just gonna leave well enough alone. Anyway, they're raging for the machine funded by Larry Fink, Soros, Rothschild, Schwab, and they think that they're the counterculture as they ride on a float sponsored by Bank of America. If I could find that image of the 2012, the Occupy Wall Street thing, and then they word searched some of these Istophobic hot words, and they showed the lines. And then in 2012, Occupy Wall Street, when the left wing, maybe the anarchist left wing, was starting to look at the 1/10 of 1%, the financial institution, and then suddenly the media introduced all these Istophobic terms. So you had a group who was going against class based, which is like, that's the only class warfare that will have any positive effect, is class warfare. And they're starting to look at these financial institutions and things. And so the financial institutions and the media got together to introduce all these Istophobic hot words into the media, into the lexicon through colleges and control the media. And so suddenly they subverted class into race. And that all happened in 2012, and the left wing got completely subverted and corrupted, where the joke is, yeah, there was Occupy Wall Street. Now they're funded by Bank of America, Chase Bank, Wells Fargo. I think Bank of America gave $250 million, $1 billion to BLM, which really means they just gave it back to themselves, because all that money it disappeared. And even Soros himself gave $250 million allegedly to BLM. I mean, some people bought homes with it. And you look at like the scam of BLM isn't such a scam. So, people ripped off a couple $1 billion, big deal. The scam of BLM is that the media is not reporting on the scam of BLM. And that the district attorneys, attorney general's offices for various states or federal authorities are not doing anything about it. It just came and went. It's like, they ripped off $1.5 billion, $2 billion. Yeah, that's right. So you guys gonna write a story about that? That's on the list, right behind the Epstein Maxwell client list. So that's a no, right? And they look at it like, I'm not gonna get fired. Writing about BLM will just get you fired. Writing about the Epstein Maxwell will just get you killed. It's like, yeah, you have a home somewhere, a wife and a family, you're writing for these reporters, you're doing well. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to get killed over Epstein Maxwell and That's insane. It's like you see which way the wind is blowing. So yeah, like so the media is not the media anymore, and unfortunately the government's not the government anymore. So like, what do we have? Oh, we have a commercial zone ruled on the face of it by like these financial institutions and tech NGOs, but also ruled in the hidden hand of it by people who can get into prison cells with Epstein and Brunel. I think it was Brunel, and delete people. So that's the real hidden hand. Did I get off course a little bit? Um, Anyway, so you have Marvel Comics now where the heroes are openly pushing censorship. If you remember Ms. Marvel, I think from several years ago, or being violent against people who are peacefully assembled, as long as it's against blonde people who are peacefully assembled. I don't. I think that was ignited with Mark Waid and Kwanzaa. Kwanzaa. As long as it's against the right targets. I don't think Stan Lee would have been on board this new crop, or Captain America, where suddenly all the bad people in America are blonde farmers who are growing corn or something like that. They're the real danger to America, not Detroit, Chicago, Oakland, Hunters Point, parts of LA. No, it's the blonde farmers in Idaho or wherever they grow corn. Like that's the potatoes probably up there. That's the real danger. These guys in small towns who are like growing potatoes and corn. Like that doesn't make any sense. Was that Ta-Nehisi Coates? It's like it doesn't have to make sense. It makes him feel better. Like you should have a superhero go to Detroit and the needle scratch on the record as everyone looks at you like, "Are you out of your fucking mind? What are you? You're fired. Get the fuck out of here." It's like, yeah, I'd never be allowed in those rooms in the first place. Anyway, I don't think Stan Lee would have been on board this new crop. He would have recognized them for Bolsheviks and maybe asked them, hey, when you tear down this society, what are you going to replace it with? Because they did it in China and Russia, and all they got was well fertilized fields. Anyway, I've got a cold and I'm losing my voice. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys all next episode.